Hello, everyone. My name is Paul, and welcome back to the new news. I hope that y'all are having a great day, and I hope that you, your family, and your friends are, of course, safe. And if not, I really do hope they find that safety and security here in the very near and upcoming future. Obviously, a lot of stuff going on today. Really quiet in certain parts of the world today. There was a lot of stuff regarding some updates, a couple of updates regarding kind of like the rocket attacks that we had covered in Erbil yesterday, and a lot of stuff like that. But really, Ukraine and Russia were the focus of the day today. So there's certainly a lot going on. There's a lot of stuff happening politically, especially within Russia. But there's a lot of stuff going on worldwide. And even though we may not be hearing about it through our sources, there's certainly the world continues to turn, and things just aren't all that great in certain parts of the world right now. Right now, you're talking about certain things happening like famine in the Horn of Africa, Ethiopia, Somalia, as well as a severe drought that has highly impacted that region. Specifically, in that region alone, children under the age of 5 are especially impacted. You also have areas such as Brazil, which had severe flooding and landslides, which currently, as we last reported, the death toll is at 56, with 56 missing and 29 additional injured. You also have flooding that happened down in South Africa, specifically in the Durban area, where there was over 400 people that were killed during the flooding and landslides there. You also had Super Typhoon Rai going through Southeast Asia. You have obviously humanitarian crises going on in Iraq as the Tigris River is drying up, and subsequent famines, and of course problems with their security concerns in the region. So a lot of, and of course, massive humanitarian crisis. But luckily, we are trying to be the news that gives back, and you guys as a community have made that awesome, and you guys have made it possible and continue to make that possible. So I thank you, because this is what this is the goal that we started out with. This is what we wanted to do, and every little step forward is just another great thing that we can do. So I appreciate it. Please check out the description below and check out those links, because that is how we give back. There are a ton of different donation links in the video description. Please check them out. They are not just for Ukraine, though you can support Ukraine as much as you want. I know that is the big topic that's on everyone's minds, but do not forget about these other regions. We want to help people globally, not just on the big topic of the night. So please check out the other regions as well. We have gone through and vetted those ourselves, so we know that those are official organizations. We're currently trying to vet others as well. If you have any more, please let us know in our Discord. The link is also in the description. But on top of that, if you can't give a lot, give a little. And if you can't give anything at all, please give us a like and subscribe, because the more people that come here and the more people that, one, get to enjoy the news and how we deliver it, also can help us in our endeavor to help people globally with the very news that we talk about. These people are affected on the very thing that you guys come here to watch and learn about every single day. So let's continue that endeavor, and I appreciate the support you've already given us. And without further ado, we're going to go ahead and dive right in. Now, in other parts of the country, there wasn't a lot of news, but when it comes to the Donbass, which is really the meat and potatoes of the war right now, has a lot. Especially when you're talking about the battle of Severodonetsk. There's been a couple of different developments with Severodonetsk, where this ongoing battle has really captured the attention of really the focus of the war. This has turned, much like Mariupol, into kind of a small cataclysm of what this entire front is like, and what the war and how brutal this war is. Right now, at least from our understanding, Russian forces control approximately 70% of Severodonetsk now. And this comes as Ukraine attempted to conduct a massive counteroffensive and were initially successful. But it appears, at least according to Ukrainian regional officials, that there has been some issues with the counteroffensive as that has continued. Now, this was something that was to be expected. Ukrainian forces and Russian forces over the last few days have been going really back and forth, and this is why we really haven't shifted the battle lines a whole lot. War is a very fluid situation. It's constantly evolving and changing. As I speak now, there is a change on this map happening in Severodonetsk as I am talking, and that is because every single second, every minute, every hour, every day, all of that is going to change this in a continuum of those spans of time. So right now, that is at least what we are hearing. We can pull this up for you here. So that is kind of what we're seeing here regarding coming at least from this source saying according to regional officials. So this could very much change, and we're actually going to be talking about the entrenchment and the really major battle going on here in this industrial district. Now, the industrial district has really been the focus of today's fighting. There's been a large amount of fighting in and around this area. This is just a heavy industrial district for the city. Most major cities are going to have these. You saw that with Mariupol with their separate steelworks plants that they had. You also see this in Kyiv. You see this in all pretty much every region has it. Even my town has it, and I'm in the U.S. So, but the heavy fighting. Ukrainian forces have really entrenched themselves within this region. They're using it as a strong point. These structures usually are going to be a little bit more, say, your average housing or Soviet-style building block. Those apartment blocks that they built out of concrete. These are going to be a little bit more durable. They're going to be able to withstand more. And it's basically when it comes to urban fighting, this is kind of a dream of a defensive position. That's why you also saw them pulling back to the Azovstal, because the Azovstal, 1, had a nuclear bunker underneath it, and 2, pretty much everything there is bulletproof because it's a big, heavy steelworks. Everything in there is supposed to resist molten steel. So, but very similar idea here. A lot of that similar stuff, very heavy industrial equipment and facilities, and various strongholds, and great for urban fighting, at least as a defender. But you can just take a look in this video that we found of the fighting going on in the city. So let's take a look here. I'd also apologize. I've had a little bit of buffering issues today. I don't understand why, but that is currently the situation. So obviously you're going to get this stuff from afar, but it is pretty heavy fighting. And right now, from our understanding, for all we know, there's thousands of troops that are invested in this single battle that are probably going to be probably the pivot point for either Russian and or Ukrainian forces, because that's going to be their strong point. That's going to be their anchor for any other maneuvers that they're going to be doing, especially if they're entrenching into this position. They're expecting to anchor the rest of their maneuvers off of this. This is their strong point, and then however they want to outmaneuver each other or attempt to outmaneuver each other is going to be based off of that. As we move a little bit further down here, we actually can see this apparently is a little bit older footage, but I thought it was going to be very important to show. So something that most people don't understand is that life expectancies in a war zone are very short, obviously. That would be something easy to understand, but you don't realize how short. So something that you actually kind of get taught, it's not doctrinal at all. So this isn't like official doctrine, but this is pretty much what I've been passed down from, say, my seniors and my grand seniors. And this is kind of what we see here, is that if you're a machine gunner, right, as soon as you open up your machine gun fire, you become the most dangerous target on the battlefield for the enemy. And so they concentrate your fire to knock out the machine gun. And therefore, a machine gunner's life expectancy is 7 seconds once they begin an engagement. Anti-tank missilemen, believe it or not, have a life expectancy of 8 seconds, because once you open up once you fire your missile, you are now considered the deadliest target on the battlefield, because you can take out any supporting armor assets that enemy forces may have. And this is why the Javelin was designed to be a fire and forget missile system. This is why it has such a low signature with its backblast. This is why, you're not seeing a lot of, crew-served anti-tank guided missiles, such as, wire-guided missile systems. You're seeing a lot of stuff that gives you standoff. The Stugna P is operated remotely. The Javelin is fire and forget. The In-Law is fire and forget. You're seeing a lot of these. You're not seeing a lot of things like the Metises or Cornets or tow missiles or the Dragon system. That's because you have to physically guide it to the target if you're using those. And that means that once you fire that, you instantly become engaged. And that is what happened to this Ukrainian Javelin team. So take a look.
Давай, братан, ебать. Горите, пидоры, сука.
Didn't take very long. This is why you shoot and scoot. This is why you do not stay in place. It's fire and forget. Don't sit there and watch it. It's going to hit its target. There's like a 98% rate of hitting a target with a Javelin. It's almost impossible. It's a heat-seeking missile. I've never seen a Javelin shot miss in my lifetime. So, I've never. None of my peers have missed. I've never missed. Like, nobody has ever missed a Javelin shot that I have seen personally. It's extremely difficult. The trainers are even more difficult than it is in real life. And you have to have at least an 80 to 90% hit rate on the trainers themselves. So that's kind of, it's a pretty easy system to use. It doesn't take very long to learn how a Javelin works. It does to learn a lot of the more intricacies of it, but to actually just use it, it doesn't take very long. And it's not hard to use. I mean, you literally lock onto a target, fire a missile, and leave. You don't even need to take the missile tube back with you. It's useless. Just drop it in place and take the clue with you, which is the command launch unit. So, for any Ukrainian forces that may ever watch this stream, as cool as it may be to get that really cool camera shot of you destroying a Russian tank, shoot and scoot, man, you're going to live longer. As we jump over here to Kadivka, we actually jump onto the topic that really made today's headline. And it's one of several contenders, of course, but this is big news. And this is because the Stakhanov Stadium, which is located here in Kadivka, which is behind Russian lines, it's an occupied city, was actually hit using precision-guided munitions. This stadium was being used by the Wagner Group. It looks like Wagner, but it's pronounced the Wagner Group. This is a private military corporation, or PMC. It's a Russian unit. It's basically an extension of the Russian armed forces that allow the Russians to maintain plausible deniability for their actions, because they can turn around and say, those are Russian mercenaries. We didn't give them those orders. Input X event here. This has actually happened in February of 2018 during the Battle of Kasham, where the Wagner PMC as well as pro-Assad militias engaged a U.S. Basically a U.S. outpost near Kasham, Syria, and we bombed them for 3.5 hours. We killed and wounded over 300 Russian PMCs, Wagner Group PMCs. So that is, and the Russian Federation, we don't have any troops there when we called the hotline. So that's kind of what you're seeing. It's currently still burning and cooking off. That's because there's a lot of fuel being stored here. There's a lot of ammunition. They're using this as an ammo dump. This is basically a forward operation base for the Wagner Group. And so they called in artillery on this position. They actually geolocated it using social media, and they actually dropped rounds directly on this. They used some of those 155 precision-guided munitions, and they put them right in the center of this place, and it tore it up. Let's take a look. So right now, they're saying 30. This is part of the stadium here.
Boy.
Now, right now they're saying 30 casualties. Now, we don't know. That's very highly disputed, and that we cannot confirm any of that. So, whatever casualty rates you really hear, I wouldn't be so sure of the actual BDAs on this. So obviously just a bunch of videos of this place burning to the ground. And you can see it covers the skyline here. A pretty massive ammo depot that was in this place. It just kind of trails off with the wind. But this is why social media is so important. Everyone talks about, oh, it's TikTok, it's not a reliable source. Oh, it's Twitter, how reliable of a source that is. Well, in this day and age, this is an intel gold mine. Social media alone is an intel gold mine. This is exactly why you don't see a lot of videos of Ukrainian forces when they're on the move and conducting offensives. But you do see a lot of footage of Russian forces on the move within the occupied zones. Because, and this is also the same reason why Ukraine said you need to either delay releasing this footage or blur out stuff, identifying features in this footage, or both, which you have seen right here on the channel. Because this stuff can be geolocated. This stuff can be used to improve targets. And this is how they actually found out to hit this target. So let's take a look here. This is a video from the Wagner group on social media, of course. This guy is over here. He's just chilling up in the top of this little area you saw burning to the ground as a bunch of Wagner PMCs arrive, and they're getting ready to move out, and they're in formation, and he's just kind of chilling, having a good day. It seems harmless, but in war zones, this stuff kills. Take a look. Sorry, there's just no audio with this, but they're just pulling buses up. I mean, nothing crazy, right? And it's just a bunch of dudes chilling. Yep. There he is in the box up there, just enjoying his nice morning coffee. But yet Ukrainian intelligence got a hold of this footage, used the data file information for this, and basically geolocated where this footage came from and dropped artillery rounds into it. That is why social media is so important. At no other time in human history has a war been so thoroughly documented on all sides. And at no other point in a war has any type of military force or intelligence agency been able to have such a vast amount of information about their opponent at any given time. This is why conducting maneuver warfare and conventional warfare in the 21st century is so deadly, and why it is so difficult to try and outmaneuver your opponent. Because everyone has a cell phone in the world. Everyone, damn near. I mean, it's hard to believe, but people in Syria, they're carrying around smartphones. They had Twitter. Whenever we got rocketed, when we were at the embassy, whenever we got bombarded by Kataib Hezbollah, they were posting it on Twitter from inside the cab of the truck. Everyone has a smartphone. And that means everybody can record what's happening and who it's happening to. They can record the conflict. They can record where they're at. And intelligence agencies can use this and actually engage targets effectively. As we move over here, this is the city of Kostyantynivka. I'm sorry, my pronunciation is absolutely terrible. I barely speak English, let alone a Slavic language. Also, Kurdish and Arabic, I'm a little bit better, but not by much. So apparently what ended up happening is this is either a bomb or a missile. It looks to appear to have been a missile strike, not in direct. It wasn't a direct missile strike, however. What ended up happening is it looks like Ukrainian air defense systems attempted to shoot down an incoming ballistic missile, one of those theater ballistic missiles we were talking about over the last couple of days, the same similar types being used against Kharkiv. And what ended up happening is they did indeed shoot it down, but unfortunately the ordnance didn't detonate when it was hit by Ukrainian anti-air fire. And so since the ordnance inside was intact and the crush switch was intact, once it hit the ground in the middle of the city, it actually ended up detonating. We don't know the casualties of this, but it caused a pretty massive crater. It is pretty catastrophic damage here. So let's take a look.
Ебанула бомба, блядь. Человека вытаскивает. Сука. Константиновка. Там грязь.
Все, вышел, а ну, дорогу, расходитесь. Аккуратно. Расходитесь, чтобы ему сейчас дорогу дать.
Вадима сейчас выйдет.
Поломанный, нет? Ты целый?
Как ты стоишь на ногах? Ты что?
So as you can see, absolute destruction. Those houses stood no chance. I mean, the crater is massive. But unfortunately, no matter what you do, no matter how much of a good defense you put up, it's never going to be perfect. No matter what you do, a war will always result in civilian casualties. So that is it's a tragedy, but that is the fact. That is the reality of warfare. As we jump down here, there's a little bit of a lighter note, though, and that's because this is breakfast on the front line. Every infantryman that I have ever met knows this line, and that is that chow is continuous in the field, meaning eat whenever you plan on eating because you don't know when you're going to get the chance. Sleep when you get the chance because you don't know when you can next. Very wise words to live by. It's helped me through a lot of difficult situations, and certainly these two Ukrainian soldiers are certainly living up to those very expectations. These guys, they're in their defensive positions. They're in their trenches here, somewhere in the Donbass, and based on the topography, we can kind of take a look and say, well, it's probably along the southern front. But these guys are just trying to enjoy their morning breakfast. They're trying, they're kind of kicked back, kind of relaxing. Like, it's not a hot sector of the line right now, but along the entire front line, there's always artillery coming in, and these guys aren't going to let any Russian artillery ruin their nice morning breakfast. Let's take a look.
Ебать. Я так? Дядя Саша кушает. Под обстрелами. Ну вот так мы и ебать обедаем. Еще что-то летит. А, ебать, мина упала.
Да.
Сзади нас. Сзади нас мина еще одна упала. Тоже просрала. Ебать, а так?
He just kind of ducks down a little bit. He's like, oh, is it close? Nah, it's not close. He just kind of goes back to eating. Yeah, when you're under that much bombardment and that continuously, you get it. Like, you get those kind of, well, if it happens, it happens. Also, I love the fact he wears a Punisher dog tag. But, yeah, I mean, he's in the field. there's artillery going ahead. It's a normal day. It happens all day, every day he's been at the front lines. You really don't get scared, past a certain point. You just kind of it becomes a normal. I shouldn't say you don't get scared because that's not entirely true, but you get accustomed to it is how I would say. It's just like anything. You adapt to your environment, and unfortunately, it's not something normal people should be adapting to. But yeah, entirely. Like I used to have a routine. We had Katiba Hezbollah when they would bombard us. We had them almost on a clock. I would come off post. I would go to chow. I would get something to eat. I'd go back to my where I was being housed at in our room at the embassy, and I would sit down. I would eat. I would have enough time to have a phone call with back home because I was able to get internet in the room, and then about anywhere from 1800 to 2 a.m. Katiba Hezbollah would fire at least once between those time periods, if not multiple times, usually somewhere between 4 to 8 munitions at a time. It was never any less than 4, never really any more than 8, and they were normally just smaller Katyusha rockets. They weren't anything bigger than 123 millimeters. So, down to almost a science. And then you got so used to it that when the alarm went off, sometimes you just didn't even get out of bed if you were asleep. Wasn't even worth it, because if it goes through my window, what's my body armor gonna do? It's a 123 millimeter rocket. Nothing. I'm just gonna go to sleep. I'm just gonna go back to sleep. Not worth it. So you get used to it. It's a scary thought, but you do get used to it. As you jump over here, we've talked extensively about the famine and the grain situation here in the country, and the blockades and grain being used as a weapon of war, which it certainly has. But Ukrainian farmers are still trying to harvest, despite the dangers, and despite the fact that a lot of them are at the front lines right now. They're still trying to bring in a harvest. We already know that there's not going to be as much of a bountiful harvest this year. I mean, first of all, those grain stocks don't last forever. They're being targeted. They're being stolen, targeted. They're destroying the infrastructure to get it out. They're not deblockading anything. They're not coordinating with any other governments to try and mitigate the effects of this. Most of your farmers are at the front lines. If they're not, they are kind of scared to death of the fact that while you're out and disking and plowing and seeding and fertilizing, you can just as easily hit a rocket or a missile that's been buried in the mud for the last month, and then all of a sudden you don't exist, neither does your tractor. It's a very dangerous job, and that's going to deplete next year or the next season's harvest. But the Ukrainian forces understand this, and being at the front lines, kind of being in the midst of a lot of these farm fields that are trying to get some kind of a meaningful harvest going, these rockets that are landing, they're causing fires in these fields, and Ukrainian forces are coming out from their trenches and actually trying to put out the fires before they can spread and destroy even more of the crops. Take a look. So, obviously, they're trying to do what they can, but, they're just destroying more grain crop at the end of the day. As we jump down here over to Bezimene, which is one of the major filtration detention camps that they have, as well as penal colony number 52, also known as the isolation colony. All 3 foreign fighters have received the death penalty. And this is coming from the Supreme Court of the DPR. On the basis of totality of crimes, finally appoints Aiden Aslan, Sean Pinner, and Ibrahim Sadoun an exceptional measure of punishment, the death penalty. So that is what they stated when they ended up finally sentencing 2 British subjects, Aden Aslan and Sean Pinner, as well as 1 Moroccan, who is Ibrahim Sadoun, to death by firing squad. This was pretty much the expected verdict. Over the last 5 days, really since Sunday, when a lot of this really started to come to light about the trial going on, we all knew that they were going to get the death penalty. Despite having joined and holding both dual citizenship, Aden Aslan has both Ukrainian and British citizenship, and having fought in Ukraine with the Marine Corps since 2018, he's being tried as a mercenary, which means that Russia is not applying any of the Geneva Convention to him, or any of them, for being foreign fighters. So that is currently the situation. This was reported on by Ilya Ponomarenko. This guy, Aden Aslan, is also known as Cossack Gundy. He also fought with the YPG in Syria before he joined the Marine Corps in Ukraine. But that's what's going on. Here we have is the sentencing, filmed, of course, by RIA News. Let's take a look.
Виновных в совершении преступлений предусмотрен статьей 232, часть 2034, статьи 323, часть 2034, часть 3 статьи 430 Донецкой Народной Республики и назначить наказание по статье 232 УК Донецкой Народной Республики в виде лишения свободы сроком на 17 лет без ограничения свободы. По части 2 статьи 34, часть 3 статьи 430 УК Донецкой Народной Республики в виде лишения свободы сроком на 7 лет без ограничения свободы. По части 2 статьи 34, части 3 статьи 323 УК Донецкой Народной Республики исключительное наказание смертную казнь. На основании статьи части 368 УК Донецкой Народной Республики по совокупности преступлений окончательно назначить виновным исключительное наказание смертную казнь. Садун Ибрагимова признать виновным в совершении преступлений, предусмотренных статьей 232, часть 2 статьи 34, статьи 323, часть 2 статьи 34, часть 3 статьи 430 УК Донецкой Народной Республики и назначить наказание по статье 232.
So I really don't feel like I need to go through that anymore, but it was a sham. The whole trial, it was we knew the verdict 5 days ago. We knew it was going to happen. Russian media knew it was going to happen. They were debating on whether they should shoot them or hang them. We showed it yesterday. So we all knew what was going to happen. But I also don't think that there didn't appear to be any doubt in Aden or any of their minds. Because Aden said, yeah, I'm guilty of all this. Because it doesn't matter if he says guilty or not guilty. He was given a packet on the DPR's law, essentially, and his case, and made to represent himself in the DPR after fighting in the Battle of Mariupol. Yeah, death by firing squad. He knew he was going to get the death sentence, so why bother, right? And I don't think after fighting in Mariupol, I don't think these guys are probably all too worried about being executed, because I don't think they probably expected to live through Mariupol, let alone up until this point. Now, there hasn't been any response by the British government yet, but I'm sure we can expect one at some point, an official statement, and that's currently what we're currently waiting on regarding this, because that is pretty much what's next on the big scale of geopolitical affairs when it comes to Ukraine regarding this trial. And with that, on a pretty terrible note, when it comes to Ukraine, that is actually all of the news in the country, but there's a lot of news outside of Ukraine regarding the war. And we're actually going to jump up over here into Russia. And that's because more T-80s were spotted here in the Moscow Oblast at Yakroma. So these T-80s are being flatbedded on train cars. Presumably they're going to be headed over into Ukraine. And these are to replace massive losses they've taken to their armored forces. Basically, their BTGs run through tanks about as fast as they run through troops, and it's a meat grinder. So their armor is really the backbone. Armor and artillery make up the backbone of the Russian military, not troops. Armor and artillery. Really, Russian doctrine you can easily break it down into about 3 different categories. You have the first phase, which is where they use all of their air power, naval power, and artillery, and they bombard an area into oblivion and soften up the defenses. Then they conduct their second phase is conducting a heavy armored push, which is why you see motorized rifle companies, these unsupported tank attacks and light armored attacks with the infantry fighting vehicles and armored personnel carriers. That is why you're seeing this happen. That is why tanks are rolling through cities by themselves with no supporting infantry, is because that is the Russian doctrine. That is how they operate. They put the big, heavy metal things in front of the really squishy guys. It's basically the opposite of how a NATO country operates, where you put troops in front of the tanks, and then now they provide mutual support as opposed to unsupported assets going in front, becoming really big, easy targets, and then the squishy guys mopping up whatever resistance is afterwards. And that's how they work. Because the third phase is where the infantry comes through. They push through whatever break through the enemy lines that those armored columns established, and then they also mop up any meaningful resistance, as they're coming through and kind of outmaneuvering. It's designed for open warfare throughout the tundra, the Russian tundra. This is kind of developed initial phases during World War II. You saw this especially late war into the Cold War. It was a very well-established Russian doctrine within the Soviet Union. If a war was to ever break out between East and West, this is kind of how they were planning on doing it. Now, they're trying to modernize after basically the collapse of the Soviet Union and when Russia was rebuilding itself. This is what they're trying to do. That's why you're seeing T-90s modernize. It's why you saw air assaults being conducted at Hostomel. Why you saw it wasn't really a shock and awe, but it was as much of a shock and awe as I think Russia could probably muster. One, they weren't expecting to face stiff resistance like this. They were expecting it to be, the first invasion of Iraq, essentially, where, Saddam Hussein, got kicked out of, the Iraqi army got kicked out of Kuwait and pushed back into the Iraqi border and in the Battle of 73 Easting, and in capitulation in less than like a week. That's not the case, obviously, but that's where it went to, and then you saw it very quickly shift as they hit those walls, realizing they can't do that anymore, where you saw them really start shifting back to their older doctrines and tactics. And as we jump down here into Moscow, there's a couple different developments. So the first one is Yandex removed national borders on the global map, stating that they were focusing more on physical landmarks than national borders. Though they kept the names of all the countries, but this really kind of continues to go with the Russian theme in the last few centuries, where Russia owns the world and there's really no borders. It's all Russia. So take a look. I kid you not. Here is the Yandex maps. First of all, this is a political map to begin with, right? There's different types of maps for different purposes, right? Like you have a topographical map, you have a geopolitical map, you have, you have satellite imagery, maps composed of satellite imagery. You have, there's maps for population where countries are form, like their sizes are based on their population or their GDP. There's hundreds of different kinds of maps. You just never see them. They're not really useful to the average person, you or I. But this is a geopolitical map. Its whole point is to have international borders. Yandex is missing the point as a cartography service as to how maps work and why they work the way they do. But it sticks with the theme of what Russia's really been doing for really the last couple centuries. We jump down here. Russian media announced Nicaragua allowing the Russian military into the country. Now, the Russian military does do minor operations in certain areas inside of South America and Central America. They have kind of loose alliances to some countries, such as Nicaragua. But this is really because they're planning, Nicaragua, the president has said, you can build a base here. And the reason they're having an absolute media frenzy with this because, we're really going to be putting it, we're going to be putting forces right next to the United States. We're going to make them all nervous, which isn't entirely true. In fact, you have Little Diomede and Big Diomede Island, which is located in the Bering Strait. They're only 2.4 miles across. From each other. It's actually the closest point between the United States and Russia. They actually have different date lines. So Big Diomede is actually a day ahead of Little Diomede by almost a full 24 hours. And the Russian military completely moved, the Soviet Union moved all of the inhabitants of Big Diomede Island and placed a whole bunch of troops there, and it has been a military island ever since. So they already have troops within less than 3 miles of American shores. Less than 3 miles. How much closer do you want? You have a base less than 3 miles. The whole island is a base. What more do you want? Like, how much closer are you gonna get? It doesn't make sense, but it makes it sound cool, right? Because no one cares about Little Big Diomede Island, right? No one cares about the Bering Strait. And I kid you not, these islands are right next to each other. That's Little Diomede. That's Big Diomede. That's it. That's the only that's little body of water is all that separates Russia from Alaska. Right there in the dead center of the Bering Strait. That's it. So it really doesn't make any sense. It's just more saber rattling, essentially. We can take a look at this. This is off of Russian media.
Самый неприятной для США вишенкой на этом демократическом торте стало сенсационное заявление президента Никарагуа Даниэля Ортеги. Он разрешил ввести в страну российские войска, корабли, самолеты, разумеется, исключительно в гуманитарных целях. Зайти в Никарагуа наши войска российские могут, согласно его предложению, уже начиная со второй половины 2022 года. Как вы хотели? Если американские ракетные системы с украинской территории лишь чуть-чуть не достают до Москвы, то и России пора разворачивать что-то тяжелое поближе к американскому граду на холме.
For purely humanitarian purposes, but with American missiles being able to reach almost to Moscow, we should put more missiles closer to the United States. Russian media, what are you? Well, you're government controlled to begin with. So that's Russian state TV for you. So you know that message had to be approved by the government. You drop down. I remember, I make references to historical events all the time on this channel. And I'm no historian, right? I have certain military backgrounds, right? Like I served in Syria and Iraq and Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and all that. But I'm not an expert on European relations. I've had run-ins with the Russians, but outside of that, like, not an expert, right? I just find history fascinating. So I don't declare to be an expert in any of this. So, but Peter the Great of Russia, really known for conquests and really building up the Russian people, all that fun stuff. I've made, references regarding, Russia's invasion to, World War II, World War I. But this is a chilling one. So this is with an interview with Vladimir Putin at the Peter the Great exhibit in Moscow, and Putin is speaking to a bunch of students, and he states, during the war with Sweden, Peter the Great didn't conquer anything. He took back what had always belonged to us, even though all of Europe recognized it as Sweden's. It seems now it's our turn to get our lands back, and he does this smiling. I wish it was a joke. Let's just take a look.
Петр I Северную войну 21 год вел. Казалось бы, там воевал со Швецией, что-то отторгал. Ничего не отторгал. Он возвращал. Да, а как? Так и есть. Вот все при Ладыже, там, где сегодня Петербург основан, ну, при нем основан. Он когда заложил новую столицу, ни одна из стран Европы не признавала эту территорию за Россией. Все признавали ее за Швецией. А там испокон веков наряду с финно-угорскими народами жили славяне. Причем эта территория находилась под контролем российского государства. То же самое и в западном направлении. Это касается Нарвы, там, его первых походах. Чего появился туда? Возвращал и укреплял. Вот что делал. Вот. Ну, судя по всему, на нашу долю тоже выпало возвращать и укреплять. И если мы будем исходить из того, что вот эти базовые ценности составляют основу нашего существования, мы, безусловно, преуспеем в решении задач, которые перед нами.
Seriously? First of all, there's been so much news about stuff like this, and it baffles me. But this is kind of goes back to some of the insights I was talking about yesterday, where while Putin is nostalgic about the Soviet Union because he was successful in the Soviet Union, he was a KGB officer. He oversaw political affairs in Eastern Germany. He was very successful. He even calls the fall of the Soviet Union the greatest tragedy of the 20th century, despite the Holodomor, the Holocaust, the Great Depression, the revolutions, World War One. The execution of literally essentially anybody that wasn't a Bolshevik, including the Mensheviks, which were even lesser, the less extreme socialists who were in charge of Russia before the Bolsheviks had the second revolution. Right? But he's not trying to rebuild. He's not trying to rebuild the Soviet Union. He's not. He's trying to rebuild Imperial Russia. He's established himself as essentially a lifelong dictator, and he is, he's literally look at his symbolism on his retreats, on his resorts, where he goes when he's not in Moscow, because he's a dictator. He can do whatever he wants. He can spend as much money as he wants. He's essentially all powerful, and he has a crap ton of oligarchs who essentially just lost all of their fortunes, because we just slashed all Fortune 500 companies in the world by about, a third. And he has the crests on his own resorts. He has the crests of the Tsar. He's in Imperial Russia. Peter the Great had nothing to do with the Soviet Union. He had everything to do with the Tsar. He was the Tsar of Russia. It was imperialist Russia. The invasion of Finland, the invasion of Sweden. When parts of Poland were part of Russia. So, the Soviet Union, sure, it extended its borders, and, there's a lot of reasons for it. And he may be nostalgic about it. It's why the Russian national anthem and the May Night Victory Parade are back. But that's just because he was successful during it. He really sees this as retaking Imperial Russia, true Russia, as he sees it. But it's not, this isn't the time of the Tsar anymore. You killed the Tsar well over 100 years ago. So, it doesn't make any sense, except to anybody but him. But it's okay, though, because you can be back in the USSR if you live in Russia, and that's because the Russian auto manufacturer Lada, very famous during the time of the Soviet Union, has been reacquired by the Russian government, and therefore is now a Russian-owned auto manufacturer, and they've released the 2022 Lada Classic. It features absolutely nothing. This is the most bare-bones basic car you can ever get. That's it. It's the most bare-bones basic car you can get. And guess what? So was every single Lada produced by the Soviet Union forever. They produced so many Ladas, so many of them. It's ridiculous. I mean, that you still see them all over the place. But it was state-owned. Everything was state-owned. Right? And now they're back to being state-owned. I mean, but when all of the other manufacturers pull out of your country, I guess you kind of have to produce vehicles as a state-owned government because you're an authoritarian regime. But don't worry, it gets even better because the State Duma, aka the Parliament of the Russian Federation, passed laws blocking the European Court of Human Rights verdicts inside of the Russian Federation. So, the European Court of Human Rights is the top human rights organization inside of Europe, and Russia actually pulled out of the European Commission. So, they are no longer going to recognize same-sex marriage, which was one of the verdicts under the ECHR. They're not going to recognize financial compensation unless it's in rubles and only to Russian banks, and any other directives passed by the European Court. Don't believe me? Congratulations. Straight from the Duma website. The fact I go on these things, it really, really frustrates me. But here you are. This is the Duma. This is their official website right up here. You can go check it out yourselves if you're interested. Go down here. You know, we're talking about, you know, the independence of the Duma, the Donetsk People's Republic, you know, all of this, that, whatever. Glorious Russia, you know, the fun stuff. But it's baffling. So they're not going to recognize any of the European the European Court of Human Rights. So what does that break it down to? So what's next? The ICC would be next, essentially, which would be the International Criminal Court, which means trying for war crimes. In fact, the European Court of Human Rights tried for war crimes based off of the First and Second Chechen Wars. That is exactly the council we were talking about. That is exactly the court we were talking about, where people were tried for the filtration checkpoint system, also known as filtration camps, inside of Russia during the First and the Second Chechen War, where people were being, you know, systematically beat, tortured, executed. They are just saying, we're just not going to recognize any more verdicts from you because it doesn't go in our favor. It's being used against us, is basically how the Duma has put it. So where does that put you next? Well, you just kind of go a little bit higher and you get into the International Criminal Court, which would be The Hague, you know, the same place, you know, that tried things like, the trials after the Holocaust, you know, international crimes, you know, by major nations. I mean, I don't know what else to tell you. And if we jump down here, school children recreated the execution of a Soviet partisan during a school musical in Dagestan. This is morbid beyond all belief. They dressed up as Nazis. One of them dressed up as the Soviet partisan Zoya, I'm going to butcher this so bad, Zoya Kosmodemyanskaya, who was executed by the Nazis in 1941 as a result of partisan activities in captured regions during Operation Barbarossa. It's absolutely morbid. Just take a look. These are school children. School children. Keep in mind. Baffles me. Just take a look.
Эй, товарищи, чего смотрите? Будьте смелее. Бейтесь. Бейте фашистов. Жгите. Травите. Мне не страшно умирать. Это счастье умереть за свой народ. Вы меня сейчас повесите, но я не одна. Нас 200 миллионов. Всех не перевешаете. Вам за меня отомстят. Солдаты, пока не поздно, сдавайтесь в плен. Все равно победа будет за нами.
That absolutely baffles me. Now, when you're talking about nationalism, right, and extremism, that is putting that mildly. Like, in the United States, a lot of schools require reading things like Night by Elie Wiesel, who was a survivor of the Holocaust. He wrote Night, he wrote Dawn, and it's technically fiction, but it's historical fiction. It's based off of his experiences going through the Holocaust, right? Like, we talk about, like, the French partisans, you know, when in the French resistance, we talk about Operation Barbarossa and why it failed, you know, the Russian comeback, taking of Berlin. We talk about the operations in Normandy. We never really talk about, you know, taking Norway back or any of the Baltic states, but, you know, all of the meat and potatoes really that anyone else learns during World War II, right? We don't use them to create, like, they make great movies, sure, which you could say, right? But we don't use them to... You're calling another country full of Nazis. You're basically calling the rest of the world a bunch of Nazis. You hold a parade about the Great Patriotic War of the Soviet Union, also known as World War II, in every other part of the world. And you held musicals regarding, you know, the hanging of partisans and basically a martyr light. Yeah, that's kind of you start getting into some really extremist ideologies when you start talking about stuff like that. So, kind of concerning to say the least, but at this point, not a surprise. As you jump over here to Lithuania, the Lithuanian Minister of Defense had a response to the Russian Duma after the Russian State Duma, someone actually called for the cancellation of the recognition of the independence of Lithuania from the Soviet Union. Keep in mind, the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. It hasn't existed for almost 30 years now. Over 30 years now. 31. In his response, only a state ruled by beasts could start a war similar to the one that Russia had started. I am not surprised that in politics they do not behave according to human standards, and we must respond accordingly. Be ready to defend ourselves and together with our partners, political, diplomatic, or other means. So, yeah, I don't think that's going to go very well. Yeah, so the State Duma, the Russian Duma, someone proposed that they should just cancel, you know, they should literally no longer recognize Lithuania as an independent state from the Soviet Union. What? That's not how anything in this world works. And you also don't have a military to back it up because guess what? All of them are dying in the Donbass over here. And I say that quite literally because it's a meat grinder. So what are you gonna nuke Lithuania? What do you gain from that? Nuclear annihilation? Because that's essentially what would happen. Like, there's no military there's no bite behind the bark. Like, they can unrecognize all they want. You know what also isn't recognized? The Donetsk People's Republics and the Luhansk People's Republics and whatever Kherson's going to become if they hold a referendum there finally. Like, none of these regions are recognized. This area, right, this part of Moldova has been a breakaway region for 30 years since the Soviet Union collapsed. There was a military intervention by Russia in this region. Guess what? No one recognizes this. This is still in Moldova. You only recognize this region because there's a dotted line here if you zoom in close enough. Like, it doesn't, there's no sense. There's no sense whatsoever as to what's going on. In the minds of, like, okay, you know what? Belarus joining the Russian Federation, I can already see that. They're essentially already part of it. But, like, Lithuania just getting revoked, like, it doesn't work like that. Like, nothing works like that. No politics in the world work like that. You can't, like, you have to have, like, a military response to back this up if you're intending to do something this crazy. And Russia doesn't have it. They don't have any standing army. They would have to partially or fully mobilize, and they don't have the logistics to do that. Same thing with like Finland or Sweden. They don't have the military. They don't have the military to take Ukraine, let alone any other country. A conventional war would literally mean the death of Russia. There is nothing left. There would be nothing left because there's no way they could support it. They don't have anything to support. They don't have anything to support the war they're in now. And statistically speaking, from the onset of the war, they should have rolled through Kyiv by like the 72-hour mark. Statistically. Obviously, it didn't happen. I'm glad it didn't happen. But statistically speaking, like, Ukraine shouldn't have stood a chance just based on the numbers. So, yeah, there's no bark to the bite. It baffles me. It truly baffles me. Now, someone was saying that, talk about the Australia and China and the fighter jets, right? In the fighter jet issue. So we're actually rolling into kind of different parts of the world now outside of this. I still have one more thing regarding the Ukraine and the war going on there and politics surrounding it. But so now that we're kind of more into the international news, I can kind of go into this. So China is looking to expand its sphere of influence, and Australia is not a big fan of this. They have a couple of different close connections in different parts of Southeast Asia, and in the greater Pacific, and especially in the Solomon Islands. And the Solomon Islands is building a relationship with China, which while Australia and the Solomon Islands have had a really good military relationship, China expanding its sphere of influence can provide a lot of those services cheaper, and they can also update a lot of equipment and storage facilities and military facilities. And there's a possibility that part of that may be Chinese military forces being on the Solomon Islands, which would be a big aggressive stance considering they've already built additional islands in the South China Sea. So they're not recognized. They're not recognized by anybody. They just happen to be here. But they're being used for military purposes. They're asserting unsubstantiated claims, even by within the international community. But China is rapidly militarizing, and they are rapidly trying to expand their sphere of influence, even through force and through subliminal force as well, which I will actually get into here in a few minutes. But jumping back over here into Armenia, believe it or not, Lavrov, since he couldn't fly to Serbia, he decided to fly over here to Armenia. And Armenia is kind of a quiet, I wouldn't say an ally, but they are, because they don't have much to offer, but they are definitely one of those that you could side one way or the other, or definitely more in Russia's favor. A lot like India. India, despite having relatively good ties in the West over recent years, has really shifted more and more towards Russia. And you see this in a lot of their voting habits now, and a lot of their rhetoric, because they don't want to cut off Russian ties. But Armenian protesters were already out in the streets. They were already absolutely pissed at their own government, because basically Armenia and Azerbaijan are still technically at war, and Armenia was not very kind to Azerbaijan during the war. They completely sacked cities, essentially. It was rather brutal, especially on a Middle Eastern war. And for a Middle Eastern war, it is very much more industrialized Middle Eastern countries fighting each other. Very reminiscent of things like the Iran-Iraq war back in the 80s. And with this, so Armenia is expected to take pretty sweeping concessions. Basically, whatever Azerbaijan proposes to them, they're going to accept. The opposition party for the government is not very happy with this, and so they've already taken to the streets. Upwards of 50,000 protesters in Yerevan alone. And with Russia coming in here, Sergei Lavrov actually went to Yerevan today, and he met with multiple government officials. Sergei Lavrov is the Minister of Foreign Affairs for the Russian Federation. And yeah, the opposition party did not take kindly to this. They were protesting en masse on the streets today, carrying around both Armenian flags and Ukrainian flags right outside a lot of the high government centers of the city. Take a look. So that's kind of the situation here. It's unlike the opposition party protests that we've seen thus far. It wasn't nearly as outspoken, I would say. It wasn't nearly as loud, and you know, there wasn't a bunch of violence in it like we've seen in the past. But that may be because of some pacification efforts on the side of the police forces and the security forces, because they've been really trying to pacify Armenia. But that is kind of the situation there. Obviously, a lot of people not so happy Lavrov decided to show up. Now, while we don't have any points here, there was something reported on yesterday. We have just some very minor updates. There is a U.S. consulate under construction in the city of Erbil, which is in Iraq. And the city of Erbil, and it came under what appears to be either be a rocket or drone strike. There were no reported casualties of U.S. citizens. However, there were several people wounded that were both inside their vehicles and walking on the side street when this attack occurred. Now, according to our sources, Kataib Hezbollah is officially the ones who did conduct this attack, which is one of the groups I mentioned yesterday regarding this. That's about all of the additional information we have. Kataib Hezbollah is a Shiite militia. It's Iranian-backed. These are the same guys that protested at the embassy and that the U.S. has conducted airstrikes against. They are responsible for killing U.S. contractors and U.S. forces, using IEDs and rocket attacks throughout Iraq. And despite this, they are also heavily used by Iraq in order to bolster their military forces, because they're also embattling the Islamic State. So it's a really much a double-edged sword. And I have no kind words for Kataib Hezbollah personally, but that is kind of the situation and what we know thus far according to our sources. As for the situation in Syria, outside of the military exercises, we do not have any further information. We do not have any information regarding an increase in the activity by Turkey. There's really just no updates. We're not hearing anything from either side, but we also know that Turkey has said that this operation will likely be occurring this week. So we have tomorrow, Saturday, and Sunday still to see what Turkey does and how aggressive this campaign is likely going to be, but it's looking to shape up to be a full-scale war at this immediate point. And we actually have to come all the way over and drop down here into Cambodia. And they're keeping it on the lowdown, but China is extending its power. Cambodia and China have, as the Chinese have described it, an ironclad relation. The upgrade to the Ream naval base here, and it's very heavy involvement, not just from Chinese contractors, but there's also been, at least according to Western intelligence officials, a significant increase in Chinese military activity. Not all of this is very open, however. The Chinese are taking very active steps in order to limit what can be perceived as their military force in Cambodia at this naval base. But from what we're understanding at this point is China is not only going to be upgrading this naval base, but also establishing their own naval facilities in Cambodia as well. So very, very important. So they disguise PLA troops at the base and try to limit activities during foreign delegation visits, but there's apparently heavy involvement from China. Of course, not just the contractors, but you can see them here. This is actually but they got a photo of them breaking ground on this. So what does this mean? Well, is Cambodia that strategic of a country for China? Not really. But what it does give them is it gives them a jumping off point for the Gulf of Thailand, right? And it gives them another point. It gives them somewhere else that they can store their military. China has the largest navy in the world now. They're heavily militarizing. They're getting ready to launch a brand new aircraft carrier. They're building a large aircraft carrier fleet. They are, I mean, when I say they're quickly trying to militarize, it should not be underestimated. The government has essentially put their entire industry behind building military contracts with other nations and upgrading their infrastructure to support those contracts, whether that is through subliminal means, meaning not only can they conduct increased trade with other countries, such as Cambodia, but also increasing their capacity in order to house warships if need be. You're talking about the building of rail infrastructure in certain countries, so that can be used as we've seen with Ukraine, dual purpose. Not only is it good for your own goods and transporting civilians, but that also allows for quick travel via rail through, especially in mountainous terrain where there's a lot of tunnels, where you can move military equipment relatively easily without without being attacked very easily. Rail lines are extremely small target from the air. So everything serves a dual purpose, and we can see this. They're really trying to expand their sphere of influence. It's like if Japan just built a lot of military treaties and then set their invasion forces in, say, the Philippines without firing a shot. Then that's essentially what they're trying to do. And you're seeing this. They essentially want Taiwan, which is their main thing, but they're not a fan of South Korea. They're not a fan of Japan. There's a lot of U.S. forces in this area, and they're trying to rapidly kind of encircle, because they really don't. This is why China and Russia get along so well, is because they have very similar ideologies. Both of them very authoritarian. They are very set in their anti-Western ideologies. They are kind of moving towards the same economic goals, while China has much bigger ambitions than Russia does, and China actually has the military and the populace to back those ambitions, and the industrial center to do that. So that's kind of what we're seeing here, and that's kind of should explain a little bit of the greater scenario, just out because everyone likes to focus on Taiwan, but really it's about Southeast Asia and the greater Pacific Ocean as a whole. Much similar, very similar. It's a little bit more quiet than how Japan did it during World War II, but it's a similar ideology to expanding that sphere of influence like the Japanese Empire did during World War II, just without bombing Pearl Harbor in the process. As we jump down here, we actually jump back into the Borno region of Nigeria here in Africa. The Borno region is heavily contested between government forces and the Islamic State, which is conducting essentially an offensive in this area. And we actually see that here today. This is coming from the Nigerian military. They actually recorded video footage of one of their firefights. So that is really not something you see very often out in this region. We see photos of the aftermath and the non-graphic ones. We don't post the really graphic stuff here. We just post the captured weapons and whatnot, destroyed vehicles. But this is actually a firefight. This is pretty rare. So I figured it was something worth taking a look at, so you can see kind of what the fighting is actually looking like here. We've seen the Islamic State, drop a couple of, mortar rounds and fire some rockets, but we haven't seen an actual engagement. So let's take a look. So it seems that the video really wanted to stop about halfway through. I'm sorry about that, but you can kind of get the idea, right? It's not how the U.S. would approach, the Islamic State, but that's because Nigeria is not the United States. When we're talking about counterterrorism operations, we're talking about, the fighting in Niger and Burkina Faso, Mozambique, and, commit horrendous atrocities. No. This is relatively equally organized, equally armed opposing forces fighting each other, almost as if it were two countries fighting each other. The Islamic State has a massive backing, as well as many other terror organizations and rebel resistance organizations. And, there's military juntas, there's all sorts of stuff going on here. And that is why it's so difficult for, you would think, oh, well, why doesn't Nigeria just take its whole military and just steamroll the Islamic State like the U.S. did, and not, completely knocked them out of Iraq and Syria? Well, one, we didn't. The Iraqi army did, but they did it with intense bombarding campaigns and, a little bit of our help, but we also heavily supplied the Iraqi army. These guys are basically getting their own support. There's not a lot of coalition forces. Most of the coalition forces that are in this region are normally from other, name a random coalition country here, and none of the major powers, except maybe Germany and France. And they are conducting peacekeeping missions as approved by the United Nations. They're not really conducting active combat roles. France was in Mali until they got kicked out by the military junta there. And that's really opened the gate for the Islamic State to have a resurgence, and now they're in really heavy fighting between the government and the Azawads. And you're seeing that here in Nigeria, you're seeing that in Niger, you're seeing that in the DRC, and you're also seeing that with, say, like Al-Shabaab here in Somalia, where, sure, Somalia had a bunch of, Burundi went and slaughtered 100 of them, took over their base and raided it. So while it sounds like there's some really military coalitions going on, they're relatively equal in their strengths. So that is why Africa is going to be the hardest campaign against the Islamic State that we have seen, because places like the Philippines and like Africa did not get the investment over the last few decades that, say, Iraq did, when it came to their military forces and fighting insurgents. They're not receiving nearly as much support as what they did from allied countries. So that's why there's such an issue, and that's why why the fighting there is going to look very different from the fighting against insurgent forces over the past 20 years. And finally, we actually jump over here into Boston, and that's because there was a new particle discovered on a kitchen tabletop. This is on a kitchen counter. So researchers have discovered a new particle that is magnetic, is a magnetic relative to the Higgs boson. So basically, the Higgs boson was created with the Large Hadron Collider, and it's used. They found this through particle acceleration. But this one is called the axial Higgs boson, and it was found using an experiment, and it fit on a small kitchen countertop. And this student found this and wrote about it. It's a magnetic cousin to the Higgs boson, which is a different particle, but the particles responsible for granting other particles their mass is what the Higgs boson is. This could be a candidate for dark matter, which essentially, according to estimates, accounts for about 85% of the total mass in the universe, but it's only been able to be found through gravity. We've never been able to actually see a dark matter particle. So even the professor, Kenneth Birch, said, when my students showed me the data, I thought she must be wrong. And he said, it's not every day you find a new particle sitting on your tabletop. So it's pretty cool. This is all coming from Live Science, of course. So if you guys want to go check out their article on it, it may, it doesn't sound like it's easy to understand, but believe it or not, it is. They're really good at this. But a lot of cool stuff. I mean, finding a possibility of finding dark matter is a huge breakthrough in science. 85% of our universe, the mass of the universe, 85% of the mass that makes you and me and makes up all of the empty voids of space is dark matter. And to finally find a dark matter particle, I mean, that opens the door for, tests and theories which rely on dark matter in a way that we've never seen before, and that could prove that could help prove or disprove a lot of theories, string theory, all sorts of stuff. So really big universal questions on why we exist and how the universe works. this thing is going to be able to answer some of those questions and also bring up quite a few more. So pretty cool. But with that, that's actually all of the news tonight. I am surprised I didn't receive a lot more comments or kind of questions here in the chat. So I hope I explained everything well enough. You guys really didn't have any, but a lot of stuff going on, a lot of political stuff going on. A lot of stuff that are bigger geopolitical things, right? And a lot of stuff that has some pretty concerning ties to history. Just a lot of stuff going on in general. A lot of it not very good and concerning, but luckily we get to be the news that gives back. And that's only because of you guys, the community, which, once again, I really can't appreciate the support. You guys have been awesome. And the great thing is that the more people that come here and watch this, the more people, get involved with this project. We're never going to be putting super chats on the channel, and that's actually something we initially set out to do. We're never putting super chats on this channel. We're never trying to build like our own private revenue. Like, I have a full-time job. Everyone here is volunteering. Like, most of us are working. We don't really need the money. We just want to help people throughout the world and report on the news as independent sources. So, we're never going to see super chats. Once we get large enough to get monetized, we're actually going to be having a fundraiser on the stream every single day. So there's never going to be a time there's not a fundraiser, and we're also going to keep all of those fundraisers in the description as well, just so that way you can have your options of supporting organizations as you please. We don't want to force you to just donate to one. We really appreciate the support and the continual support. Check out the description below up until that point, and keep checking out all of the different foundation links we have down there and donation links. They cover the whole globe. I'm talking, Southeast Asia. I'm talking Ukraine and the outlying countries, taking in humanitarian, efforts. The Horn of Africa. We're still looking for more for Brazil and Mexico and Durban, South Africa, and all sorts of places. So if you have any more, join us on our Discord and let a staff member know. We can get that vetted. Same thing with any sources you might have. We're always looking to improve the news and the content, and we don't know everywhere to look. So just let us know if you guys have any of those. We'll go through the vetting process with those too. So, but once again, I appreciate you guys. I appreciate the support of the staff. But if you guys can't give a lot to those donation links, give a little. If you can't give anything at all, just give us a like and subscribe, because it helps us reach more people, and the more people that join this, the more good we can do overall. Which, with a world that's pretty dark right now, it's always a good thing to be able to put a little bit of light back into it and to help people. I mean, we're literally going to help starving children in Africa. I don't know what could make you feel any better than that. So let's have a meaningful impact like we already have. My name is Paul from the New News. Thank you for joining us tonight, and I hope you guys have a great day. I hope that you and your family and your friends remain safe, and I hope to see you guys once again tomorrow for another 24 hours of the Big Daily News Review. And with that, have a great night, guys. Bye.